PR is everything that you do to manage your relationship with the public. I tell people if they want to get into newspapers to go where the press is playing. So there's two really easy ways to do this. One is newsletters are so underrated as a new business tool. People get so obsessed with social media, but the reality is you don't own that audience database. Wherever your clients are playing, you also need to be happy to play. Because if your self-promotion feels uncomfortable and icky, you're not going to do it. Especially for the kind of like brand creative people, it's like sort of 101 that a person's face is like the easiest way to make a connection. The other thing is,
if I'm going to go and pitch some journalists to get some exposure for my brand, where do I start?
When you are pitching to a journalist and you want to
what would it be like to be featured in major publications and have your ideal clients come knocking at your door? In today's episode, I'm talking to Lucy Werner, who is all about helping founders get famous with her books and her newsletter called Hype Yourself. In today's episode, we get tactical and practical and break down the ways that you can get more PR, more exposure, and more opportunities for your business. Lucy has over 20 years of communication experience. She's written 2 best-selling books and is extremely good at getting PR. So she herself has been listed in Alt Magazine's Power 100, the Dots Rising Stars, Startup Magazine, just to name a few. She's done work with the Future, and her Substack publication is now in the top 50 business newsletters on Substack. I know you're going to really enjoy this conversation, especially if you are a little bit introverted or right now your focus is growing your client base and you're not quite sure where to start. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please hit that subscribe button and share it with a friend. Lucy, what does it actually mean to hype yourself?
Well, in the world that I'm from, hyping yourself is just getting yourself out there, getting your stories, getting your work, getting your business out there. I think there's a myth that PR is just getting press, which I know as publicity, which is just one strand of PR. But to me, PR is everything that you do to manage your relationship with the public. So even right now, with me doing this podcast interview with you, that is a PR opportunity for both of us. We are promoting ourselves, we're having a conversation that's going to connect with our audience, hopefully. And we're also aligning with each other by even sort of positioning each other, alongside each other on this podcast. So it's thinking about all of the ways that you can reach your audience.
Nice. So we are currently hyping ourselves.
We are
right
hyping.
Now.
We are hyping right now in a very gentle way.
We are on the hype train. Okay, awesome. And you've worked with a lot of businesses over your time, both kind of in when you had your PR and branding agency, but now also when you kind of mentor and teach small businesses with your kind of Hype Yourself brand, and you've got your newsletter. What are some of the things that you see that prevent people from hyping themselves more?
It's funny, from a lot of the workshops that I teach, I've actually got research on this. There's like a question that I ask, and it's normally things like time, not knowing what to say, confidence, imposter syndrome, generally just like not knowing where to start.
Yeah. Okay. And you've written a whole book on this, right? So
yeah.
It's
this one
called Hype Yourself. Yeah. And it's awesome, right? It's practical, it's tactical. I think some of the things that surprised me when I read that book were some of the case studies and some of the things that you talked about in that book. I hadn't necessarily tied those two things together. So how a feature in something could lead to a big partnership deal or landing a big client. Could you just kind of talk to us about the link between new business and hyping yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So even with myself, I did a podcast with somebody in the nonfiction world talking about one of my fails, which was I failed to become Sunday Times bestseller. I think failure stories are really good because it's lovely and aspirational, inspirational to share the wins all the time. But the reality is, as business owners, we're not winning all the time. So I like to set a big goal out in public and then show how I try and hit it. And on that podcast, I then got booked to do some speaking for a public speaking membership. I got approached by a brand to do some corporate work, which is like a 5-figure corporate speaking opportunity. I've had countless people come to join my newsletter membership because they've heard the advice that I was giving on that podcast. So essentially for an hour of my time, just sharing my story, bringing that human interest to it, kind of building actually a little bit on that episode that you had with Mark LaRousse, like sharing those stories. But I also had a lot of my business expertise thrown in there as well. It was like the perfect recipe to be a new business generator for me.
Yeah, I love that example. I just think if I was listening to this and I was a little bit introverted and I was really focused on my creative work, hearing you say, I went on a podcast and talked about how I epically failed kind of sounds like one of my worst nightmares. Like, how do you frame that in your head? How is that not painful for you?
First of all, I've been working in this industry for 20 years. So if I can't walk my own talk, then I wouldn't be doing a very good job of it. So that's probably like not a beginner tactic. That's probably when you've warmed up a bit and you've got yourself out there. On a very introductory level, I tell people if they want to get into newspapers to go where the press is playing. So there's 2 really easy ways to do this. One is on Twitter, or formerly Twitter, now X. There's a hashtag called Journo Request. And a lot of my members actually use that to pitch themselves, to give expert comment on industry expertise. So it feels a lot safer for people if they don't really want to share what I call showing a bit of ankle, if they only want to sort of show their business knowledge. Being that kind of voice of expert for a business article can be a really safe way to start. And for example, I had somebody who has a financial services, like a personal finance brand. She gives a lot of advice in that space. She kind of had a piece literally last week in the Times, and the schools that she's trying to do education work with, the head of that programming contacted her to say, I just wanted to get in touch with you again about the programming content for next year, for the education content. I just saw your name mentioned in the Times and it reminded me to get back in touch with you. So I think it's being realistic that it is a brand building tool. If you've got like a branding agency, you get how it works. It's not like you create a logo and a website and then overnight the sales come in. It's about positioning. So to get that kudos of being in a national newspaper isn't necessarily going to drive this big hit of traffic to your website and sell you out of clients overnight. But over time, it solidifies your positioning as the expert in that space.
That makes total sense. So for those of people listening who haven't read the book, and I'm going to recommend that everyone does read the book because it's awesome. But just to show us a bit of ankle, what are the steps if I'm going to go and pitch some journalists to get some exposure for my brand? Where do I start?
Start with your business goals. Like, what do you actually want to achieve here? Is it you want to attract talent to your business? Are you trying to get a brand partnership? Are you just looking for more clients? Because that's going to sort of shape where you're playing. A mistake I see, particularly in the creative world, is we typically just focus on creative publications to showcase our work. But the problem is with that, if your goal is to get new business, your clients are not reading those publications necessarily for interest. It's your industry peers. So it's great for showing off to like Dave that you went to uni with, that you're on the front page, or you being a featured case study. But for your actual clients, they're more likely to be reading the national newspapers or listening to podcasts or watching radio, going to events. So it's really focusing on what's the goal of your PR efforts? Who are you trying to reach? And then where are they? Because believe it or not, maybe partnering with somebody who has a small newsletter of a couple of hundred could actually work so much harder for you than being in Forbes.
Yeah. First of all, you need to figure out the objective. Like, what am I trying to achieve here?
Start with your target audience. Then that's going to start to give you a bit of a short list. So I always say, try not to think about more than 5 opportunities of where you want to place yourself. And let's just take Forbes as an example, right? Let's say you want Forbes for the kudos. Then I want you to drill down, like, which section in Forbes are you going to be in? Is it in the small business entrepreneurship? Is it in the finance? Is it in investment? Like, Forbes is actually huge and there are thousands of contributors. So I want you to like drill down and actually be like, this is the section I want to be in. This is the names of the writers, the contributors who cover the sort of stories that I want to be featured in, and then drill it down from there. Because I think there's this myth that just like, creating a logo is building your brand. In the kind of PR equivalent is writing a press release and sending it out to hundreds of people is PR, and it's not. For me, it's actually sending a succinct pitch to that journalist, which I feel like is going to be music to your ears because I know you love talking about how terrible cold pitches on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Getting a bit of a rep for that recently.
It's the same thing. It's the same strategy. When you are pitching to a journalist, it's just like how you should cold approach somebody on LinkedIn. You want to demonstrate that you know them, what they're talking about, and ultimately why your story is relevant for their audience. So it's not a sales pitch or talking about how great your business is. It's picking up on something topical or your expertise, or you're commenting on something that's happening in the news, or you're showing a new trend, or you're disagreeing with some work that you've seen out there and why you don't think it's good. It's, having those combative opinions. So thinking about, first of all, what the goal is to help you decide where you want to play. Then where you play, who are the right people that you need to connect with? And then it's taking those connecting steps to make sure that the story you're pitching to them is actually relevant. Like journalists and contributors, I'm sure you get this as like a podcast producer as well. You're probably inundated with pitches all the time. So you're not doing them a favor by sort of saying, I'm the CEO of this company, you should feature me. They're doing like the favor for you, and it isn't an advert for you. It's they also want to be they're a business too. They want eyeballs on the story, or they want listeners, they want clicks. So you've got to make it compelling and interesting for them.
Yeah. And all of the most successful pitches I've ever done to get on like a podcast or whatever has always been when I've done the heavy lifting for them. So as an example, hey, like Lucy, I see you talk about PR, but I see on your podcast episodes, you haven't really had someone come on and talk about the relationship between PR and sales. Like, this is something I've just built a workshop around. Here's like the outline of it. Do you think this would be a good topic that your listeners would find interesting or whatever? Like I've actually gone and done a bit of research, basically.
Exactly. 100% that. Yeah.
And I think that strategy makes a lot of sense, and it's very simple. When I say things like that to my clients, their first question is, how do I find out that info? Like, how do I find out? Obviously, I can set a business objective. So let's say my business objective is I want more clients. Like, that is my number one reason I want to hype myself. And I now need to find out, where should I be featured? What sort of stories, what sort of angles could I pitch this publication at, or where do I start finding out that information?
So I would say the first thing you need to be thinking about is hopefully you are already working with your ideal client. And if you are already working with your ideal client, you're going to know a little bit about where they're going, what they're doing, where they're getting their business inspiration from. But it is really a bit of sort of clipboarding work. I know this is the sort of thing that like Daniel Priestley would talk about when he's sort of talking about like the early stages of key person of influence. It's like he would say, you basically need to have a PhD in knowing what your client problems are. So as part of that PhD analyzing work for me, it's finding out where they're consuming their information. And you know what? It might not be a podcast or a newspaper. It might just be LinkedIn. It might be Instagram. It might be TikTok. For me, there's also this sort of double whammy of wherever your clients are playing, you also need to be happy to play. Because if your self-promotion and your PR for your business feels uncomfortable and icky and like flossing, you're not going to do it. So you need to find that magic between where your clients are and where you're happy to play, and find the sort of the energy in between. Because if you feel really awkward every time you post, we kind of sense that. Whereas if you're enjoying yourself, like I know you did a post this week about, should I start pulling apart the cold emails on LinkedIn?
Yeah.
And I could tell you were really enjoying it. And it wasn't, nothing about that was, I'm Matt, this is what I do, this is how you work with me. You were just sort of having fun in your area of expertise. And so then we have fun with you. Like we have a little cheeky like grin with you as we're reading it, because we can sort of sense that. So it's really finding out where the places are that sort of fit comfortable for you. For me personally, and for a lot of the clients I've worked with, public speaking works the best. So whether that's you're on a panel, whether that's you're a keynote speaker, whether you're leading an online workshop or an in-person workshop. So there has to be a bit of a test and learn element with that too, to see what does work, what does convert. And again, it doesn't work necessarily overnight. Like I don't think always you see like a keynote speaker and they go, right, yeah, my business revenue went up by 50% off this talk in 24 hours. But over time, you'll start to see that audience connecting with you and coming to you. And I also say, put yourself where you don't belong. So thinking of like the creative industry, for example, you might think, oh, okay, I need to be at Adobe Max or at the Cannes Lions Festival of Creativity because that's the industry space. But again, it's like, but who are your ideal clients? Like maybe you have a niche in doing branding and creative work for pharmaceutical companies or for tech or for personal finance or for pets. You know, you might have a bit of an area that you play in. So then it's like, actually, okay, how can I play in those spaces? So in my world, that looked like when I didn't have any budget starting out, because Adrian, the co-founder of my children, joined my business to set up the branding arm after he was made redundant and I was pregnant. So we didn't have like an ad or a marketing budget. We took out a stand at Career magazine because that was focused on startups and modern business, and that was our target audience. And there was all these other shops in the live market. So it was like a denim brand or a candle brand, all these different kind of cool businesses. And it was just us with some giant helium balloons because I was told, make your display high. And we just had a sign saying 15 minutes free PR branding advice. And we just sat there all day giving out 15-minute advice sessions to businesses walking past. And it was one of the best drivers of income for our business.
That's so cool. Yeah, I love that. There's so much stuff you've said there that we could pull apart. I think one of the biggest elements of this that I want people to take away, and I think the thing that you do really well, is borrowing the attention of somebody else's audience. I think a lot of creatives really struggle because they feel like they either get business from word of mouth and referrals or some kind of like new direct outreach. And there's this real like barrier for them of how do I go and start this conversation? How do I go and start this relationship? And one of the things that I've found for me has been really successful is just borrowing other people's audiences. Like there's somebody who's already got, even if it's 10, 20, 30 of your ideal clients, can you convince them? So you're convincing one person to get in front of 30 instead of trying to get 1-to-1 in front of 30 people, right? Can you go in front of them and, like you said, A, be really different because nobody else is coming in that sector, but B, do what you did. It's a great example just there that you gave where you just gave free advice for 15 minutes and you've been doing it for 20 years. So it's like, come and get 20 years worth of experience focused on your business and your challenges with one of our founders. Like that's it's an irresistible offer. It's a no-brainer. So it's like you're getting in front of the audience because you're going to that conference or whatever it was, and you're delivering value. And I think if people just did that more, then they would find the whole client acquisition process a lot easier.
Yeah, it's kind of like finding the fun in it for me. That's kind of the secret. It's like for me, self-promotion should be fun. And it's really hard to get that out of people sometimes. They think it's, I've got to sell the case studies, I've got to sell how great it looks. But actually, it is that story part behind it and showing your personality in a way that feels comfortable to you. So my Adrian, for example, who I mentioned, he is very colorful in how he dresses. Like he embodies like kind of the visuals that he creates. Now, he can do the kind of more demure corporate visuals as well, but he gets the most joy out of kind of creating something very punchy and colorful and loud. And so most of the people who want to work with him sort of see him, how he dresses, the way that his visuals look when he's promoting himself. And it automatically kind of attracts that sort of audience. Now, for other people, they're like, oh, so garish, I hate it. And that's totally fine because that's not who we were then trying to attract when we had the agency. And actually another thing that we did when we started was to create a product because he had a lot of background in building brands. So actually I've got them here. For those of you who are listening, you're not going to see, but I'm holding up some prompt cards, which are slightly sort of inspired by the School of Life. You have these amazing like cards in these boxes. And I didn't see any other service-based business owners at that time with prompt cards. So we were like, right, rather than doing a press release to say the PR agency is now expanding into branding, we just created a branding product as like the launch product for Adrienne joining the business. And then every time I was at an event, I would just give a packet of the product to people who I thought could be quite influential, might refer work our way. I give them to journalists. I gave them to people who had product pages in creative publications. So rather than trying to get our work in there, we were still getting in the creative publications, but in a different space of like product pages, which I think sometimes do really well because if people are interested in branding and creativity, they're not necessarily reading through lots of case studies, but they are looking at a list of like the top 10 creative products for business owners, for example. So that was another really great way to demonstrate our expertise, but without selling.
Yeah. And I love how you use your creativity and the things that you enjoy to make things that people actually want and find valuable. And you've created a scalable asset there, basically. How do we make hyping ourselves fun, Lucy?
It comes down to sort of who your personality type is. So you mentioned earlier about like introverts who sometimes are like amazing writers. So then it might be a case of like, well, actually for you might be looking at writing expert comment. You might be looking at doing blog posts, having your own newsletter. I feel like newsletters are so underrated as a new business tool. People get so obsessed with social media, but the reality is you don't own that audience database. Whereas with the newsletter, you have all of your customer information right there. And if you have a good open rate, you're looking at an engagement rate of like 30, 40%. Whereas on social media, like especially like Instagram at the moment, it's probably like less than 2. So you're working so hard to put out like daily content there. Whereas you could be showcasing your design and agency skills by creating a newsletter, which is actually something that agencies are probably selling on to their own clients anyway. So I feel like newsletters, particularly for the introverts or people who like writing, is a really great place to start. For the people who are extroverts or like speaking, podcasts, speaking is a really good thing to do. And again, like when you were saying about the audience match, like who gives you joy? Like who would you love to have a conversation with? Who do you want to be sat alongside? And when you were sort of saying about, you found people with other audiences, they're all people that you've admired. So I'm sure for you to be partnering with those people with those audiences, you found quite fun.
Yeah. And I enjoy the format, I think is the important thing. Like you said, it's like I enjoy speaking on podcasts. I don't find that hard. I don't find it energy draining. And then in the early days, I used to run workshops, but I used to go into a co-working space where there was kind of already an audience. So the actual running the workshop part I loved. The part I hated was trying to promote it and get everybody there.
Then you go into spaces where they've already got that database. So maybe like a co-working space that already emails out everybody in their office to say, we're doing a lunch and learn today. So you don't have to do that heavy lifting. But
exactly.
I feel like when you're partnering with the right people and places, for me anyway, I get that energy of like, oh, like I've actually, oh my gosh, like I'm going to be on this person's podcast. And that gives you that sort of joy. And when it comes to sharing it as well. And I think that is the other thing that people don't do. They work so hard at getting on the podcast or getting into the national newspaper. And then let's talk about the promotion of when you've won something, right? The LinkedIn speak of I'm excited, I'm delighted, I'm thrilled makes me want to cut my head off and throw it at people, because I'm like, that is not how you would tell me. Like if you have just won the biggest client of your life, you're not going to go, hi, Lucy, I'm delighted to tell you that today, that is not how you would speak. So when you get the win, when you get into your dream publication, you get onto your dream podcast, you get your dream speaking gig, or you get your dream client, tell us with that enthusiasm and excitement that you actually feel. Don't revert into this weird LinkedIn quote. I don't know who created the excited, delighted, thrilled quote, but like, don't do that. Like, do it in a way that we really connect with you on. And I also sort of have this rule of like the Holy Trinity. So I tell us like before the event, if you can, at the event, and then afterwards, because there's no point having that win telling us once, because most of your audience isn't going to see it. So keep finding ways, like maybe it's the anniversary of the appearance. Maybe there's a national calendar date. Maybe it's like, do you know what? It's just been a long time since I shared this. And it was like the biggest win for me, or this. So I'm sharing it again. I also think there's a few ways that when it's sharing the win, that you can think about also positioning yourself as that thought leader and the expert in the industry. One of them is sending the lift back down. So telling people how you did it. How did you get this opportunity? Because I'm not trying to say like give away all of your insider business secrets, but most people who are landing like a piece of press coverage, for example, they didn't just off the bat find their journalist, send a pitch and then get it. Rarely, if people are doing DIY PR. There's normally like some process back and forth. Somebody's done a connection, you spent ages practicing a pitch, whatever it is. There's also kind of what I call like the dual promotion. So if I've given you an introduction to a journalist and that's led to a big piece of press coverage for you, you sort of say, thanks to the journalist, thanks to Lucy, here's the win. So you're automatically spreading the love to the people that you've made the contacts with. So yeah, the fun bit, we've all got a different idea of what fun is. And I'm very much an advocate for one size fits no one. But it is, finding the medium that works for you. And it is a lot of test and learning, like with any kind of sales and marketing technique. So you can't just pitch something once, think, okay, that didn't bring me any clients and give up. And that's why I also say to people, if you're working with a PR agency or a freelancer, or you're doing it DIY, you really need to spend a minimum of 3 to 6 months campaigning on this same idea, because otherwise you're not going to have that brand consistency. And for your audience, who are a lot of creators and brand builders, they know this. So you know that you can't just keep changing what your brand stands for, what it looks like all the time. And it's the same when it comes to your PR efforts.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you talk a lot about this idea of not focusing as much on the work as a creative and not just talking about your portfolio. Can you kind of tell us why you feel that's so important?
It's boring.
Yeah.
It's really, sorry.
Well, it's not boring to peers, but like you said before, you then start attracting peers rather than prospects.
I don't even know if it is that interesting to peers. Like if I see I'm obviously right in the PR land through and through. And if I see them do well, I'm interested in how they've put a campaign together on a budget. I'm maybe interested in something that's really, really innovative, but truth be told, like those are kind of few and far between. So yeah, if it's my friend, I kind of want to congratulate them. But when sort of something's happening in the branding world, and I've been inside like big agencies where they're like, this is our flag in the sand moment. We're going to put a press release out to say we've redone our website and our branding. I think, honestly, this is just a LinkedIn post, pal. And it's interesting for your mates. But I don't think, unless we're really, pushing it on the groundbreakingness of, we've really taken it as far as we can with accessibility. You've never seen anything like this before. But the reality is, like I was saying, like, for me, there's just not that many massive innovations in like that space to warrant that it's not going to be front page news of a national newspaper. However, how you put your agency team together, your HR policy, where you're based, what your recruitment strategy is, how you're funded as a business, how you choose your clients. Have you said no to clients? Have you had like a massive client fail? Have you had like a client who got so much new business from you redoing their brand in 6 months that you've completely changed their lives and it's now making like the greater good for society? These are all things that are super, super interesting. So it's probably a kind of a nudge back to Mark's episode. If people are sat there now thinking like, what is this girl talking about? We hate her. It is
everybody, right?
Yeah, they're like, what? Our work is great. Shut up.
Yeah.
I can honestly say in all the PR agencies I've worked in, and even from running my own PR and branding agency, I never promoted the work to get new business or for PR. Like I would maybe do it as a bread and butter thing, but that was never my focus. And it's not fun.
Yeah. I think people think it's easy, right? It's like, oh, I just did this project. I'll go talk about it. And then like, I'll get more clients.
Yeah. If you drill down into like the case study of how you made it happen, that can sometimes be a bit more of a story pull, but just, here's the work. That's for your website. That's for somebody who's come to your restaurant. They've looked at the menu. Now they want to have a few pictures of what the food looks like before they place an order. But the general person walking past that restaurant on the street isn't interested in how you've put that dish together. They just want to have an overarching list of what's on that list.
Yeah. So if I've got an animation studio, you just listed a bunch of things there, but let's just say like I'm a small animation studio. I've got 4 or 5 team members, mostly other animators, maybe one project manager. What do I share? Like if I can't share my work or sharing my work is a bit boring, where do I start finding these kind of interesting things to share?
I think the animation world is really interesting. I think there's so much happening there all the time. So I would be looking to go more down pushing yourself as the thought leadership and shining that spotlight on the trends in the industry, on other things that you think are cool, in developments in technology, like positioning yourself against like maybe brands who work in that collaborator space, the technology you're using, the partners that you work with, because you also just never know, right? And this is kind of actually what happened with me and Adrienne. We started to talk about a lot of the brands that we and the tools that we were working with and the opportunities that were there. So we kind of had two arms to the business. One was sort of this, these are the kind of tips and advice we give to people who can't afford to work with us yet. And this is what we're doing for people who can work with us. But then that attracted the brands that we were recommending to do like brand collaborations with us, which opened up this whole other door of opportunities of an income stream for us. So I really think it's also, I like to say, like, think of yourself like a magazine, right? Or a newspaper. When you think of a newspaper or a magazine, if you haven't looked at one in a while, pick one up, particularly if it's one you want to be in. The front bit is the news. So but the news bit is not the whole paper. It's just a bit at the front. So for you as the animation studio, you might have the news of a new hire, a new business win, a new case study coming out. Definitely promote that. I'm just saying, like, it's probably a website, bit of social media, not necessarily leverage to get in a national newspaper or a podcast. So before I say like it's boring, I just mean it's like bread and butter PR. It's not going to be what accelerates and elevates you above your competitors. Then the next bit in the newspaper, you've got features. So that's more like the trends, industry, reports, analysis. So if you can be saying, this report's come out, this person's done this work, talk about your competitors, like position yourselves alongside the businesses that you want to be seen against. Like going right back to the beginning, when you asked me like what PR is, to me, it's everything you do in your public eye, right? So if you're talking about industry peers that are bigger than you, and you're then pulling yourself up to be seen as a player alongside them. Then after kind of got features, you sort of have the business part. You may or may not want to talk about the kind of intricacies of the business, like investment or the HR policies you have or that you're recruiting. And then you have what I call sort of like the fun bit at the back, like the horoscope, recipe pages, Sudoku, sport. I want to know about those bits. What do you talk about that with your mates that we might be interested in? How does it relate to your work? Like find the links. Like what is it that inspires you? And for a lot of creative agencies, it'll be a documentary or a podcast or a YouTube clip, or like me and Adrienne, since we've moved from East London to rural France, there's a definite decrease in design consideration in putting leaflets and marketing materials together. We get a lot of like direct mail here, which you don't get so much anymore in the UK. And it will be like the photography is distorted. So we have quite a fun time sort of like saying how you could have done design better and what tools you could have done quite easily to fix that. So yeah, I think it's just bringing like a bit of a where you are, where you're based, what you're seeing around you, what inspires you. And so when I say like sharing a bit of ankle, it's like just giving us that pinch of your personality. Like you did a really good one the other day where you took a photograph of yourself, sat on a bench being like, this is my office for the day. And then you went on to be like, I'm not bragging, but I just wanted to show you like if you change your business. It was kind of like along that sort of theme.
Yeah, I know the one you're talking about. Yeah.
It's a little bit of ankle.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's not inside your underwear drawer, but it's just giving us a pinch of your personality, what inspires you, what makes you want to work in the way that you work, so that other people think, yeah, I want to work with Max. I want to have that sort of lifestyle as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things that I think is really interesting about this is my observation with a lot of creatives is because they build a very specific skill set, they believe that their business and what they sell is that skill set. And so they get so focused on that and everything they do builds around it. And so this idea of like bringing me in and people caring who I am and my personality and my life and all these other things we're talking about just seems very foreign. And they're kind of like, I don't really understand how the fact that I do yoga on a Sunday relates to my animation studio. And it's like, well, it all does, because the common denominator is you. And like you are the one making those decisions about your business. You're deciding what clients you work with, what clients you don't, how you attack this project. Like you are your business essentially. And so I think that's just like a really important point, the way that you're kind of unpacking this. I think it's about what are some of the things that you might feel excited to share with your friends and family, and like are you sharing those with clients or on social or even to a publication that might be interested in that, and like what's the angle? And
exactly that. And I think when the other book that I wrote with Adrienne, which is Brand Yourself, it's all about like building your brand. And there's sort of 2 points from that I'd like to bring into this now. One is that like when you have no budget starting out and you're building your brand, the one brand asset that you have that everybody has is themselves. It's like their face. It's the thing that we all connect with. And we all know like the stats and the research about how we're more likely to connect with somebody's photograph over, a color block or text. So especially for the kind of like brand creative people, it's like sort of 101 that a person's face is like the easiest way to make a connection. The other thing is there's a lot of us doing the same work out there. So if we're all talking about our work, we're not separating ourselves from the other person. We give this example in the book about like if you have a butcher shop and then another butcher shop opens up next door, you could compete on price, but if they keep on undercutting you, eventually it's not profitable. Or you can kind of compete on what your brand values are, what it is that you stand for, that feeling that people have about you afterwards. So whilst I do sympathize with people who say, well, I only want to talk about the work should speak for itself. I don't want to be the face of my business. I'm shy. I don't want to, be putting myself forward. You're really doing the business a disservice because your easiest asset to promote your business is you. And when we're kind of small businesses or startups or scale ups, the easiest thing we can do is borrow from big business. What big business is trying to do all the time is engage with their audience and create communities and be authentic. And it's really hard for them to do that because they are slow, not well-oiled machines. They cannot be agile. But you, as a team of like 5 or 20 or 50, are still in that place where you can be reactive to what's happening on the news agenda in a light way without, having to run through legal. So for me, I just think even just commenting on something that you've read or resharing other people's work that inspires you is a way to get your face and your words out there without you having to expose your private life to us.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I think it's important that people feel like they can do that without being too vulnerable, because I know that's definitely a barrier for people.
And set your guardrails of like what you will and won't talk about. So I do have some topics that I'm vulnerable on. Fails might be one of them because I don't mind. I don't mind. I actually think for me, I think it's really inspiring as a female founder with 3 kids who's on like a midlife relocation to be like, I'm going to try and do this. Watch me. And show people what I'm doing. It kind of gives me the energy as well, because then I have to keep myself accountable because I've said it out in public. And I have had to say, yeah, I've not done it. This is why. I don't mind. I actually feel like I'd much rather try and keep falling over, but reaching for these bigger things than being mediocre.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that you say, and I can't remember if I read this in your book or on your website, but you say making a living should be how you choose to really live your life. And you just mentioned a little bit there about moving to rural France, raising a family. What have been some of the things that have been most challenging about that?
Time.
Yeah.
Particularly because I deal with a lot of time zones. And as you know, I'm not always great at getting my time zone matches 100% spot on. I've also, I guess I've had a sort of parenting pivot. Historically, I've always done shared parenting with Adrienne. And in the last year, he's gone and taken an in-house role, which is still based at home and it's remote and flexible. So we still kind of sit alongside each other in the office. But I'm not in that. It's not 50-50 anymore. So I'm having to deal with my ego of not being the lead singer of the band anymore. So
okay, interesting.
That's fun because I say no to a lot of stuff now. But I really wanted for a long time, when I left PR corporate land 10 years ago, I wanted to make big agency, creative, strategic PR accessible for everybody. And I started doing that by setting up a micro agency, kind of by accident, and it kind of grew by accident. And I realized that actually I didn't want to grow an agency and run a team. That's not my skill set. What I'm really good at doing, and I have this like unequivocal belief in myself in that, is that I'm really good at PR. I'm really good at seeing what your business is about, who you need to reach, and coming up with ways to put you where you don't belong. And for me, there's this effervescent energy in founders in what they're doing and their work. That's why I felt a bit bad earlier when I said like the case studies are a bit boring, because I know it's going to crush a few people. But like the energy of somebody who set up their own business in their company is magic. And when you can like bottle that and get it out in the right way to the right people, it's beautiful. And I still get that excitement when somebody DMs me to say this, I've just been picked up by Forbes. I've just got into the Times. I've just been asked to be on this podcast. Dragon's Den have just asked me to come on the show. I've just won this award. I've just been like invited to be a keynote speaker in this. And because of your workshop, I'm now charging 5 figures instead of 3. Like for me, those are the moments that give me the energy. And I think a lot of challenges that creative business owners have is doing the work they love versus making income. And for a long time, I just kept scaling the agency because actually that was easy for me. But figuring out how to sort of do this one-to-many in a way that was paying me, but was also giving value and actually giving enough access to me for them to be able to have results was a challenge. And I feel like with the newsletter, I finally got it, because now I can have this, unlike an online course, and obviously you can have a live element there, but you have to keep running it. Whereas with the newsletter, because I'm continually giving a prompt or setting a challenge or doing an interview with somebody from my network, I can nudge people to be like, okay, what does your pitch look like? All right, change this around. Okay, great. Now you've just landed a paid article for yourself in the Metro. Now you can keep on pitching because you know what that pitch feedback looks like. So I think for a long time, finding the balance. And, I'm on my third self-employed maternity leave, kind of not really in France, kind of not really in the UK. So I don't get any benefits or grants. Like it's all funded. Being in France, the childcare costs are significantly reduced. So I can get 2 days a week for 180 euros a month, which is in London before cost of living, it was 75 quid a day. So I've instantly got more affordability to practice a bit here. So now I've kind of shut the agency down and I'm giving myself 3 years to build up the newsletter business from scratch. And I'm just backing myself. I'm still doing my teaching. I still have my brand partnerships. So I've still got my other income streams that don't take a lot of my time. But I'm like, yeah, I'm going to hit 1,001 paid subscribers by September 2026. That's the goal.
And document it live so everyone can see the process.
Yeah. Or not make it, as the case may be.
Or share the lessons of not making it.
I'm at 400 in 9 months. So
that's pretty cool.
And I'm 52. I'm a top 52 Substack newsletter now in business. So I'm beginning to get in there amongst the guys in finance.
What do you use as a compass to decide if your life is moving in the direction that you want it to be moving in?
I guess it's down to happiness levels and what success looks like to you. So I have the success markers I know I want to hit. And for me, at the point of life I'm in, they're not necessarily financial. And a lot of the changes of like why I moved to France were kind of personal reasons, some of which I have shared publicly, some of them I don't. But I effectively thought, I don't just want to be working so hard to then retire and then maybe get sick and not be able to live that life. So a part of me was, I want to keep pushing myself as a business owner. I want to keep learning and keep upskilling and trying new things. And I sort of feel like I'm in that like pop star era where I'm in like the next, like all pop stars sort of reinvent themselves every 7 years. I'm kind of like, I'm now in my newsletter era. So this is like my new reinvention. So yeah, my success metrics have definitely changed. I still have like the aspiration in terms of like finance of where I want to hit. But actually right now, for me, it's having the time. I want to learn a new language. I want to be a present parent for my 3 children. I want to continue like renovating the house that we have in the south of France. I want to kind of almost go back to like what childhood me wanted, and childhood me did want to move to France and be a writer. So for me, like the newsletter is like a double whammy. Like I get to serve people and help the most people I've ever helped. And I also get to like fulfill my own kind of creative cup by writing and exploring creativity in different ways. And I'm constantly kind of making these tweaks all the time to the newsletter in ways that I find creative, at least. And I really enjoy it. And I love my work. Like I don't get that Sunday night blues. I kind of do live a tiny bit like, I don't live semi-retired. That sounds really ridiculous, but I try and have like a little micro adventure each week. So it might be I drive 10 minutes down the road and I do a little paddleboard on the lake and then come back again and work in the afternoon. Or like last week, me and Adrienne before work went to an aqua park and we're like throwing ourselves off like a 5-meter inflatable. So I try and find these like little pockets of fun to help me also bring that fun and energy to my audience. So I guess really it's an intuitive thing that if it's not feeling good, then I shouldn't be doing it anymore. And I think towards the end, when I had the agency, I cared so much about all the clients. There's no guarantees with PR. Like you can pitch and pitch and pitch. And sometimes it's just not the right time or it's not the right story. And I would be like lying there awake at night being like, I just need to get them like a big meaty piece. And there's sometimes this time constraint on there that you can't work to. Sometimes you can get 5 in 2 days and other times you get nothing for 6 months. It's just kind of the way it works. But when you're on projects with people, I would be like just thinking about my clients all the time. Whereas now I kind of effectively have 400 paid clients. And each week I sort of take time to check in with them, what their challenges are, giving them just like a little gentle tweak here or a gentle nudge there or a reshare of their work. And it feels so much more satisfying because I feel like I'm helping so many more people to hype themselves.
Yeah. And I love that. I love how you've landed here. What I'm curious to know is how do you do that? Because I think if I was stuck and I was feeling a little bit like you've just described in terms of worrying about my clients and is this what I really want? And is this really the country I want to be living in? And I don't really have time to like spend with my kids and I'm worrying about the bills and all this stuff. And you hear someone being like, I just moved to rural France and I went paddleboarding on the lake. It's like, sounds amazing, but how did you do that? Like practically, tactically, what are some of the things that you've put in place that have allowed you to kind of be where you are now?
Yeah. So I guess I should caveat one point, and which is I have spoken publicly about this, that my second child was born with 4 rare cardiac issues. So we were kind of at that point where he was living in and out of Great Ormond Street Hospital for 7 months. And after you've faced something like that and come out the other side of it, life doesn't seem as scary. So I'm definitely not going to advise any of your listeners to go through a traumatic experience to make a big life change. But that was definitely one of the big catalysts for me. I was like, okay, I can't take my life for granted. I need to live like for today because nothing's a guarantee for me. So that was definitely kind of the courage piece propelling it. The pandemic, which I do think changed a lot of people, really showed me that we didn't need to be doing the face-to-face meetings in the same way. And I do think, although we have reverted back slightly, the opportunity to be online and host meetings online is much more acceptable now than it was 4 or 5 years ago. Practically, we tested it. So we came out for 3 months in winter because I was like, if I can stomach this environment in winter, I'll be able to do it all year round. We rented out our house in London. We came out here. I quit all my clients to come out here. And I really got lucky, I guess, but also I'd spent a long time building my brand online of PR tips and PR advice, that the week I came out here, I got 3 brand partnerships land with my content. So I suddenly had like a really good income for 2 or 3 months without me having to do too much work, which helped a lot. And then I was teaching online as well in like evenings or around like pockets. So I had already started to nurture alternative income streams. And I guess subconsciously, the whole time I've been positioning myself as an expert, I knew there was always going to be the opportunity to leverage that for, paid keynotes or paid workshops, or to go in as a consultant into corporates or to do sort of like white labeled work. So I had these kind of, I think at one point I had like 10 alternative like income streams outside of the agency. So we tested it, we came out, we made the gamble, and then I got pregnant again, which was a surprise. A most welcome surprise, most wanted, but that actually was great because I was like, okay, I've got 6 months, to kind of, once you know everything's okay, you hit your second trimester, you've got 6 months to go for it. So I was like, I'm just going to push to get as much income in before I go on maternity leave. And then on maternity leave, I took about 4 months off of social media. I was still doing bits of work, but I came off social media so I could stop getting distracted by my peers and what everybody else was doing. And I looked at the costs I had coming out of the business versus what I was bringing in. And I knew I was going to streamline it a bit. So I was paying a lot on MailChimp at the time. And that's when I knew I wanted to move to the newsletter. And then I think having that time with myself just to think about what I really wanted, I knew that I was good at teaching and good at that in that accelerator space. And if I could get enough of those, with the content work I had, because now I'm an ambassador for Adobe Express, so I have regular content work for them every single month. I had that kind of baseline salary to be able to make that jump to gambling on the newsletter. But I think, again, is one size fits nobody. And with everybody in business, there's that way that you start. Like when I started the agency, I had sort of 3 months of expenditure in my bank account. So I had 3 months to kind of give myself to make it work. And I think, it is hard when you have a family because you need that income. But I know that I've always got that emergency plan of, well, I can always go back to freelancing, or I can always get an agency job again if I needed to. Like I've always sort of got 2 or 3 backup plans. So the gamble doesn't feel scary because I'm kind of just like, well, I don't want to do that. So I've got to really make this work.
Yeah, I love that strategy. I think there's 3 things that really stood out for me there. The first one was the perspective shift. And I've had that personally in my life, not with something as extreme as that. But I think getting that perspective as regularly as you can, that life is short, we don't know what's around the corner, and before we know it, we're not going to be here, is super important. And I think a lot of people don't like thinking about their mortality, but I do believe it's one of the most powerful tools to motivate you to do the things that actually matter in life and get in touch with your values. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that you clearly created multiple options. Like you didn't just say, right, I'm going to go and move to France. And if that doesn't work out, I'm screwed. I have nothing. It was like, oh, here are my all my different things. Here are the things that I built up. If it doesn't work, then, oh, well, I can go back to doing this thing. And then the third and final thing, which I don't think people do enough, is you just tested it. You just went out and like, well,
MVP'd it.
Yeah, you MVP'd it, right? You MVP'd lifestyle. And I learned this really early on in the 4-Hour Work Week, I think, Tim Ferriss, and he talks about your target monthly income.
Yeah.
And he says like people, they have all these dreams and fantasies about buying a fast car or dating this person or doing this and that and the other. And it's like they wait all of their life and they tell themselves, well, when I have 200 grand in the bank, like I'm going to buy a Ferrari or I'm going to buy this house or I'm going to like, just go test it. Like go hire a car for the weekend or go in Airbnb and stay in this place and like go to this place for a month and actually experience it and see if it gives you the thing that you think it gives you, the thing in your head that you've been imagining. Does it actually give you the feeling of that? Or is it just something that's like you've been dreaming about, but actually doing it isn't that much fun?
And 100%, one thing I would say, if you're thinking of moving abroad to somewhere hot, it's not testing it in winter. That's London. You need to test it in summer when it's really hot and everybody stays in all the time. Like in winter, it's still hot. We're all hanging out outside, But in the summer, sometimes I was like, what do you mean everybody stays in and you have to put the shutters? Like basically everybody's just sat in these, from the outside, you're like, South of France, beautiful, open shutters. No, they're not. The shutters are closed. You're just sat in the dark all day long because it's so hot. So I tested it actually at the wrong time of year, but it's not too hot this year, so it's okay.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm literally about to make a move to Dubai in September. And
are you?
Yeah, September's going to be hot still, very hot. It's 35 at the moment, but it gets up to like 45, 50 there. And it's the same. It's just indoor life. But we are also lucky that we work online, right? I don't actually plan to be in Dubai for 12 months. I plan to be there for 6 to 8 months and then somewhere in Europe for a few months when it's too hot. So Yeah, but test it, right? I went to, even just using in Dubai as an example, I've been out there 6 or 7 times now, probably in the last 8 years. And earlier this year, I was out there for a month in April. And when I went out there, I treated it. I said to myself, I'm going to imagine I'm living here right now. Like, what does my day-to-day look like? Who am I hanging out with? What places am I going to? And how does that make me feel? Is this exciting? Does this feel like the kind of place I want to spend more time in? Or actually, is it just, I needed some sunshine because I'd been in the UK for too long?
When you said about the challenges piece as well, I think it's also accepting that you can't do everything and having that confidence to say no. So if I do get a piece of work that comes to me, sometimes I think maybe I should just start the agency again. And I don't. I just think, no, I'll take the referral fee and I'll pass it on. And I might get approached to do a speaking opportunity in London and I can't because it clashes with the school run when I fly back. So it's a no. And I have to reposition it in my head of, no, but it's okay because actually that audience isn't going to be your newsletter readers and that's what you're growing right now. So your ego says you should be at this event, but actually the business CEO in you knows that being sat at your desk and just getting the writing done and servicing your existing community in the pockets of time you do have is where you're at right now. And that's okay.
Yeah. And it's that strength to have the single focus and the courage to say no to things that feel really good at the time. And it's interesting because I kind of believe that we're always signaling to the universe, for want of a better word, what we want in our lives. And often I have clients coming to me saying like, I want this thing. And then I look at how they're behaving and what they're saying yes to and what they're saying no to. I'm like, do you think the way that you're currently behaving is aligned to what you're telling me you want? And they're like, no, but it's because I haven't had the right opportunity or the thing or whatever. When I have that, I will change my behavior. And I'm like, it doesn't work like that. You have to behave the way that's in alignment with what you want first. And then those things will start to fall in place.
Yeah, 100%.
It's been amazing talking to you. I'm sure we will do another round of this because I'm sure this will be a popular episode. What would you like people to do after listening to this episode?
So starting with the books is always a good place. I've got Hype Yourself and Brand Yourself, or head over to my newsletter, which I'm sure Matt will put in the show notes, but it's on hypeyourself.com. You can link through to that, or you can find me on Substack. You can join for free. You don't have to be a paid member to get all the goodies. You can still get a load of intel from my brain every single month on that newsletter. I've got 8,500 now. So it's a really nice creative community. And I'm always sort of sharing on my socials and everywhere else, like different ways that you can be hyping yourself. So I'm generally Lucy Werner PR on all social media handles. And it's really nice, actually. I don't know if you get your audience to do this, but if they hear a podcast episode and reach out to their guest to say, oh, I heard you on Matt's podcast, because then you're not only hyping him, but it makes the world a better place.
Absolutely. We should all be hyping each other, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And I just say I've read both of those books, Hype Yourself and Brand Yourself, and I subscribe to the free version of your new newsletter. And I very much enjoyed it. And I highly recommend all three of those things. So we will put those in the show notes for you. Lucy, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for being a guest.
Thanks for having me.
Before you leave, if you found this episode valuable, please hit the subscribe button. Also, if you are a creative business owner doing more than 10K a month and you want to grow and scale without working longer hours or hiring a massive team, then I have something you may be interested in. We have just developed a tool that will give you a custom growth strategy based on exactly where you are in your business right now. So you can stop consuming lots of random content and trying to figure things out on your own and actually get something personalized to you. You will also receive a free copy of my book, and it will point out relevant chapters. If you'd like to take the scorecard, it's totally free. You just have to click the link in the show notes or connect with me on LinkedIn, and you will see a link in my bio. Thanks for listening. This is the Creative Courage Podcast.